Oh. People around the table need to remember to press the microphone button. So, sorry. Are you okay about being on camera? Because, yeah, thank you. Right, take two, as they say. So welcome to everybody, both in the room and those viewing the meeting online, to the first Public Scrutiny Board within the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. I'm pleased we are meeting today, especially face-to-face. And the board is a key part of the Mayor's and my commitment to provide transparency and accountability. It provides a public forum where senior police officers will present progress reports and respond to questions, mainly from the public that we will ask, or the public will ask on their own behalf. They've been submitted in advance. That will allow us to actually respond in full. Each of our meetings will focus on a number of specific themes or areas, and these will be a mix of topical issues along with any key themes that are set out in the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Plan. The items on the agenda today have been selected because they are areas of the public have concerns about, or indeed have a high public interest. The Scrutiny Board will be webcast live and is being done so now, and it's scheduled to take place 4 times a year. Today we also have Channel 4 in the room. Could I just remind people about information security, just to making sure in terms of laptops and papers that you're just mindful that you protect any confidential sensitive information. Please let me thank everyone who has taken time to submit the questions ahead of today's meeting. I remarked that the contributions are thoughtful, insightful and reflect a genuine concern for the issues that matter most to our communities. I'll do my best to respond to them in today's meeting, and I'm sure the Chief Constable and her team think so too. Some of the questions raised touch on areas that require further discussion with our police colleagues and wider partnership networks. I'm committed to progressing these through appropriate governance channels following this meeting so that they won't be overlooked or lost. To ensure we give proper attention to the questions already submitted and to allow space for agenda items, no additional questions will be taken today. I appreciate your understanding and continued engagement in that. This is our first event. We will be presenting information. It does mean people will start to think of other questions. We'll find a way of getting those submitted and pick them up at the next meeting. So we will develop this forum. So just to reiterate, this event is to provide that increased transparency for our South Yorkshire communities. It's not a press conference and there'll be no questions asked within that. So I'm going to move to the formalities in terms of apologies and introductions. So I've jumped straight in. My name is Kilvinder Vigurs. I'm the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime for South Yorkshire, and I'll be chairing this meeting. We've got apologies from Oliver Coppard, who is the Mayor, but if we do a quick round of introductions, say who you are and your role, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Clay. I am the Director of Policing and Reform here at Simca.
Good afternoon, I'm Hayley Barnett, Assistant Chief Constable and Portfolio Holder for Crime and Criminal Justice.
Good afternoon, I'm Lauren Poultney, I'm the Chief Constable.
Hello, my name is Sarah Poolman, I'm the Deputy Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police.
Afternoon everybody, I'm Jacqueline Bland, I'm the Assistant Chief Officer for Resources at South Yorkshire Police.
Good afternoon everybody, I'm Scott Harrison, I'm a DCI within South Yorkshire Police and I'm the Force Lead for Child Sexual Exploitation.
Afternoon everybody, my name is Gail Stiggins, I'm the Media Manager at South Yorkshire Police and here deputising today for Rebecca Moss.
Good afternoon, I'm Fiona Topliss, Communications and Engagement Manager for the Police and Reform Directorate within Simca.
Good afternoon, I'm Sharon Baldwin, Interim Head of Performance and Oversight in the Police and Reform Directorate at Simca.
Good afternoon, Rebecca Brookes, Strategic Director for Legal Governance and Commercial at Simca and the Monitoring Officer.
Hi, Gareth Sutton, I'm the Exec Director of Resources and Investment and the Chief Finance Officer at Simca.
afternoon. My name is Sally Parkin. I'm the Interim Head of Governance and Assurance for the Police and Reform Directorate at SIMCA.
In terms of any urgent matters, we can dive straight in then to the public question. So that you don't hear my voice all the time, I have asked Matt if he'd be willing to read them out, unless you're here yourselves and can read it. But I do believe that the first one, if you set it.
Thank you. So our first question is from Holly Venn. She's the Chief Executive of Sheffield's Women's Aid. She notes that we are seeing the early release of offenders due to prison spaces being maximised. Amongst those are often domestic abuse perpetrators. She notes this has frightened victims and made them feel unsafe. So her questions are: how can this early release scheme be delivered whilst also reassuring survivors they are listened to, their risks taken seriously, and perpetrators held to account against national schemes such as these? She'd also like to ask what work could be done to reassure victims and ensure specialist organisations like Sheffield's Women's Aid are involved in that work.
Okay, so I'll have a response for that, but happy if police colleagues want to chip in. I think first of all it's important that we acknowledge the impact on the victims and recognise how anxiety provoking this is, particularly having gone through the court process, feeling that they will come into an end with it, and then this comes up. So I think we have to acknowledge that. Also acknowledge the work that the government are doing at the moment in terms of building that additional capacity. But in the meantime, we know that the early release schemes are being driven by the pressure on prison places and understandably prompt public concern. There are various different schemes that are in place that relate to early release, all of which have eligibility criteria that need to be met. So staff within His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service work together and liaise with the police and other partners to plan for those eligible early release cases. And I know there's lots of partnership work being done. But as part of that process, risk assessments are completed. For offenders posing the greatest risk, they are managed within multi-agency public protection arrangements. These arrangements bring together the police, probation and other agencies to ensure coordinated oversight and risk management plans. And often within that are victim support plans. In relation to domestic abuse, there are multi-agency risk assessment conferences, often referred to as MARACs, could also be convened. MARACs focus specifically on safeguarding the victims who are at the highest risk of serious harm, ensuring that agencies share information and put in place tailor-made safety plans. So all offenders released early from prison will be subject to licence conditions. There are a standard set of licence conditions in place, often referring to where people will live or work. But within that, there are also some bespoke conditions that can be put in place. These will consider the victims as well to make sure there's effective management and control over those perpetrators, in addition to opportunities for rehabilitation. Some victims of violent crime may be referred to the Victim Contact Scheme or the Victim Notification Scheme. Both of these schemes are delivered by the Probation Service. Eligible victims are encouraged to engage with these respective schemes so that they can be kept informed of the developments and have their views taken into consideration when those licence conditions are considered and set. Whenever a crime is reported, victims are entitled to be referred to victim support services who work with them and support them. The Commissioned Domestic Abuse Service in Sheffield, referred to as IDAS, is also and I will also take forward concerns raised today in that question with our local Criminal Justice Board, where representatives of the Prison and Probation Service are representative, to ensure that we have those wider conversations and to make sure operationally those concerns are considered. So I don't know if any colleagues from the police want to add to that. Otherwise, I'm hoping that is a comprehensive response. Otherwise, we'll come back to it at the next meeting. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you. Our next question is from Christopher, who we have here in person. So over to you. Do you have it to hand? Okay, fantastic.
I think we've just been told you might not have been picked up by the microphone, so if you're happy, we'll just repeat that question. Yeah? Shall I do it? No, you.
Okay. Christopher's question was, has the multi-million-pound deficit found in accounts been resolved, and has it had an effect both in service delivery, for example, cutbacks in manpower, or on the police estate, for example, property, maintenance or development?
Thank you for the question. It's a very important one. You may know that the Mayor has commissioned an independent review into the accounting and budgetary omissions, which is now substantively completed and will be released upon some finalisation on a number of legal issues. Whilst this work is underway, the Mayoral Combined Authority and the Force have been working with national government and the auditors to address the deficits in a sustainable way. An agreement has been reached with the auditors on how to address accounting omissions and spread future costs. Whilst government have committed to additional funding and provided capitalisation direction, which will further help mitigate the impact on the initial financial shock, these actions and support received make substantial inroads into the problem. The Mayor continues to request additional funding from the government, and a productive dialogue is ongoing. Finally, the Mayoral Combined Authority and the Force are now working through a financial recovery plan, building off existing budgetary efficiency programmes. Good progress has been made, with significant cashable savings already achieved, and plans are further being developed. The financial recovery plan is being managed carefully to limit impact on both the workforce and the estate. To your point, the receipt of the Home Office funding settlement in autumn will help the Mayoral Combined Authority and the Force determine how to progress the recovery plan. Again, if anybody wants to add anything to that. Okay, thank you for that.
Shall I ask your next question on your behalf? So thank you. So there is a force review currently in progress around planning and resources. The question is, has there been a decision made in respect to the use of Niagara Conference and Leisure Centre, which is currently used for meetings, training, and the licence for the South Yorkshire Police Sports and Social Club to occupy this premises?
Thank you, and thanks, Chris, for the question. No decision has yet been made about Niagara. The Deputy Mayor just alluded to that kind of wider force, estates rationalisation and recovery plan that we're working through now, and therefore Niagara will be considered as part and parcel of that estates rationalisation. As I said, no decision has yet been made, but we will obviously make sure that SIMCA are cited and involved in those conversations and decisions as we get to that point about making that decision. Thank you.
Thanks. Blessing, if you're content, I'll ask on your behalf.
Yes, please.
Okay. So the question is around how SIMCA is preparing to support vulnerable individuals, especially those at risk of homelessness. What measures are being taken to ensure community safety, especially for those who face language and cultural barriers that limit their ability to report hate crimes or seek help. The key concerns they have around housing, homelessness, and the safety of sanctuary seekers in public spaces. They're requesting any information around SIMCA's plan to address these issues.
Thank you. Thank you. I see this question in three parts, so I'll try and respond on SIMCA's behalf. The first thing I do have to say, though, is direct responsibility for homelessness sits with local authorities who hold that statutory duty to support vulnerable people at risk or experiencing homelessness. We don't have any funding or formal role currently to prevent homelessness. Now, having said that, the Mayor chairs a South Yorkshire Mayoral Homeless homelessness task force made up of key stakeholders from across the region. We have commissioned homelessness research to identify where, as an organisation, we could support our partners to prevent homelessness in the region, including attracting devolved funding into the region. We need to ensure that those concerns that you've raised is taken to that task force and is built into that research, and that's something I'm committed to doing. We also know we have a strategic place partnership with Homes England, whose key objective is to accelerate housing delivery in the region, with a focus on affordable housing, which is key to reducing the number of households at risk of homelessness. The strategic place partnership includes the need to increase that provision of supported and specialist accommodation through Homes England's social and affordable home funds. I think you also raised the issue around vulnerability, which I think is picked up in that, and I think hate crime is something that I know the force is focusing on, and the Mayor's office. Only recently we had a meeting with a faith group, and we talked to them about how we could use them to work with communities on reporting hate crime. So that's an ongoing piece of work that I can tell you about. Anything?
The next question is on behalf of Yasmin Aslam, who's here representing Ashiana, which is an organisation that supports BAME victims of domestic abuse or sexual abuse. The question is, often we are dealing with clients where there has been a lack of communication from the police. For example, victims have called the police, perhaps have been arrested, and when released, victims are not made aware. So perpetrators have been arrested, and when released, victims are not made aware. In some cases, the victims are not only being given enough notice or options to leave or support. This also includes when there are cases of early release from prison. In other cases, victims have called the police and are not happy with the outcome, since they're not able to express themselves. For example, if English wasn't their first language, or they don't really understand what is being discussed, and there's been no use of interpreters. The impact of ineffective communication is made more compound as our clients from BMAER communities face additional advantages such as language, culture, family and community pressures, as well as unsecure immigration status. How do you plan to train and improve the knowledge and communication which will lead to building trust between the service, the police service, and the victims and survivors of domestic abuse discussed above?
Okay. Thank you, Yasmin. I firstly like to articulate that if there are cases where you or your client are unhappy about the police service, please make contact with us, and then we can go through those specific examples and take the learning from that and provide feedback to staff. So that would be my first plea to you, to engage directly with us. We would really appreciate that. I can't comment about the early release from prison because we're not the holders of that information, but clearly we are seeking to improve our response to victims as per the Victims' Codes of Practice, which is statutory guidance. But specifically in relation to your question, we are training our staff. So in the last 2 months alone, 600 frontline uniformed staff have received training in all areas of violence against women and girls, inclusive of obviously the issues that you've referred to, particularly domestic abuse. And that includes training around a trauma-informed approach. So this increases the awareness of our officers and staff about the impact that trauma has on the ability to communicate with the police, to disclose the information, but it also covers additional barriers to getting the right information, the right evidence from victims. So it covers neurodiversity, cultural barriers, English is not as a first language, and what we should be doing to cater for those. I would say that the use of interpreters, right from first point of call into our control room, right through to our investigators, is an absolute commitment, an obligation for us as the police. So again, if there are specific examples, please raise them with us. We will deal with that because our obligation is to the victims to ensure that they can be understood and everything we're saying is understood by them. We continue to work with survivors and support agencies who support women who've experienced or lived experience of violence against women and girls through our Violence Against Women and Girls Independent Advisory Group. Now, this advisory group was set up in 2021. It's grown in its strength and its diversity over the last few years, and it provides a voice for women across South Yorkshire. And we have a number of examples where it has directly influenced our policies and procedures and what our staff are doing on a day-to-day basis. We're really grateful for the contributions of those women and representatives of women through that group, and any opportunity to increase the membership or diversity of that group is again welcomed. So if you or one of your colleagues would like to get involved in that, again, please let us know, and we would love to have you. We are working currently with the Independent Advisory Group about understanding the reasons for underreporting. We understand that particularly Asian and Black African women are less likely to report domestic abuse, for example, and other matters such as female genital mutilation and other issues that disproportionately impact on women. So we're working with the Independent Advisory Group to get better insight into what those barriers are and what can we, and working with SIMCA and Commission Services, do to overcome some of those barriers. So I hope that has answered your question. Again, please make contact with us. You can give us your details afterwards, and we can link you in with the right people to have some further information about that. Thank you.
Thank you. So can I thank members of the public again for submitting those questions. I hope that will give some evidence to other members of the public that we will meeting. I really do appreciate it, and I think colleagues around the table appreciate it as well. So now we're going to get on to more around the performance. So the Deputy Chief Constable Sarah Poolman will take us through this substantive item. As part of our commitment for transparency and accountability, South Yorkshire Police will include this as a standing item. This ensures alignment to the Mayor's Police and Crime Plan priorities and allows us to monitor what's working well and, where necessary, what we can do to help or what more work needs to be done. I'm grateful to my team, who also publish a quarterly performance report which provides an update on how the police and partners are working to achieve the outcomes and priorities set in that plan, and it is available on the website. There's going to be a lot of information here. It's out there for the public. Again, it might motivate people to ask further questions next time, which will be great. And so we're going to pick a few key things out rather than try and spend the rest of the time on this, because there's some really important other subject matters we want to get into. So can I hand over to you then, please, Sarah? Thank you.
I guess we've developed the executive summary over the last few sessions, as you're aware, Deputy Mayor, so hopefully that gives a really short and concise headlines of the performance across the force in the key areas that we monitor, and we actively monitor on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis. So there is a significant amount of governance that goes into understanding how the force is performing, what the public are telling us, and how else we can improve the delivery and the services to our communities. So you'll see here we have made significant improvements in our handling of 999 calls, and we're consistently at 95-96% of answering our calls, the 999 calls, within the target timescale. The average wait time for 999 calls is 2 to 3 seconds, so it is extremely strong and one of the top forces in the country. Recent data only from yesterday shows that we are 10th or 11th in the country in terms of discontinuance. So that means that people who have tried ringing and then have abandoned, put the phone down. So we're in the top quartile now of forces around making sure that we are answering the phone when people need us. So that's really positive. Again, in terms of responding to emergencies, we've made significant improvements over the last 12-month period, and we're now consistently at 80 or above % attending emergencies within that 15-minute timescale. We continue to strive to make further improvements in our priority response times, and we've made a 10% improvement in the last 12 months from 50 to 60%, and there's ongoing work with our force control room and our district colleagues, so the staff that are going out 24/7 to respond to calls, to improve those response times even further. And I hold both the Assistant Chief Constable and the relative Chief Superintendent to account on a monthly basis about our response times. Good news in terms of neighbourhood crime, we have seen an annual reduction, a year-on-year reduction in neighbourhood crime. So that is your burglaries, your auto crime, so vehicle crime and robbery. They are reducing and have reduced year-on-year for a number of years now. We are down 8% year-on-year. And if you look at a more longer-term trajectory, we are 21% down on 2019 data, and for home burglary, 28% down when compared to 2019. And it continues to improve. We are continuing to drive reductions across those crime types. The only caveat being robbery has seen a slight increase, but the rest have seen those substantial decreases that I've just articulated. I won't talk about public feedback. We've had some really strong improvements in public feedback about antisocial behaviour, which I know the Mayor and yourself are really interested in. So that seems to be going in the right direction, and the work of our neighbourhood teams and problem-solving plans seems to be having the desired effect on trust and confidence within our communities. And there's potentially things that we can learn from that, what's worked in that space, and then push it into other spaces that are priorities for us. Vulnerable people, key priority for us, as we're going to speak mainly about vulnerability throughout today's session. It is clearly a key priority and has been for a very long time to South Yorkshire Police. Our domestic abuse, we remain at or above the national average in terms of arrest. We remain at or above the national average in terms of outcomes for victims and charges. So again, we're doing consistently well. There is always room for improvement. We are not complacent, and that is where the Violence Against Women and Girls Independent Advisory Group that I just referred to in answering Yasmin's question really comes to its fore in helping us get better in the services that we're providing. Interesting sexual offences, so this is your rape and other serious sexual offences. We had been seeing very stable volumes, but over the last 12 months we have seen an increase in reporting. We are aligned entirely with the national and our most similar group forces in terms of that increase. In fact, they saw increases over the last few years that we weren't seeing. It was stable, but we are now beginning to see that trend upwards. I do not see that as a negative. I see that entirely as a positive, because we know that sexual offending is underreported, and anything we can do, and Gail's here from our media team who's led on a number of campaigns in the violence against women and girls space. It's about encouraging people to tell us what's happened to them. So we're encouraged by those numbers. Key outcome for us, another one of your priorities is most serious violence, as it is ours. So that incorporates your knife, firearms offences, as well as GBHs, grievous bodily harms. We've seen long-term reductions in those as well as a result of the problem-solving work we've been doing in conjunction with the Violence Reduction Unit and our own GRIP team, which is our hotspot patrol team. We've seen some really good improvements in that space too. We're stable in terms of our outcomes, and that's something that doesn't concern me, but one that I really want to focus on over the next 12 months to really push up some improvements. So I hope that kind of gives you a summary of the key headlines from the document. If there's anything more, please ask me and I'll try and fill it in as much as I can.
So thank you. There are a couple of questions and points I'd like to pick out, but actually I'd like just to go to the team, see if there's any questions that you want to pick out.
Thank you. I think one of the bits of data, and we haven't got them up on the screen, was around public confidence and feedback around the service they're providing. So I think these are kind of quite stable results, and we see them across the country. And then, it's been a difficult time for policing nationally in terms of trust and confidence. But one of the ones that kind of stood out here was 21% of respondents say SYP is dealing with things that matter to people. That matter to people in their communities. That's quite low, and I know there's a lot of demand on police, but it's good to get your reflection on kind of what work could be done or what you think drives that level of response.
Like you say, Matt, it's been consistently at that kind of level for a a substantial amount of time, and that's not different. We're not an outlier in terms of that. So that does show that there is that national issue, as you've just described, around what the public are expecting and what we're delivering. You are very well cited on the neighbourhood policing guarantee, but I'd like just to add the SYP haven't waited for that government drive around neighbourhood policing. We reinvested in neighbourhood policing back in 2017. We rebuilt, we invested when many other forces weren't investing in that space, and we continue to grow as a result of the neighbourhood policing guarantee. One of the key priorities for the neighbourhood policing teams is about understanding that differential about the neighbourhood teams are delivering every day. They're going out and doing problem-solving plans every single day within the communities. Why is there a gap between that, what they're delivering, and what the people, the public, the local communities want them to be doing? So I think we need a much improved ability to engage with the public, and we're considering a new system that allows us a much better two-way conversation with the public to give us the feedback, much more regular surveying, more concise surveying, right across the wider demographic. It tends to be a particular demographic that responds to your voice counts, which is where this data is coming from. So we need to broaden the views that we're getting in and be able to have that two-way, because if we're able to tell them more effectively what we're doing on a daily basis, that may well push that up. It may well be that we're just not very good at getting it out there, and we don't have the mechanisms for communicating what we're doing. So that investment we are looking at in the next few weeks around a new system, and we're really hopeful that that will, one, improve that figure, and two, even if it doesn't get it to like a substantial increase, it allows us to understand what those things are that are really concerning the public that we can then tackle.
Any other?
Yeah, if I can come in, just in terms of the neighbourhood crime, obviously really positive to see those reductions, particularly burglary, which we know has a real impact on the victims of that offence type. I just wondered if you kind of could give us a bit of a sense of what some of those drivers are in terms of some of those reductions, and your kind of plans in terms of driving that forward.
Yes, we have, again, we go back to our neighbourhood teams, again, who are owners of the problem-solving plans. But we've been, over the last year or so, we've really tried to be innovative in this space. So you'll be aware of this, Sharon, but we have used targeted digital advertising in hotspot areas around our force area where they have a higher propensity of burglary dwelling. So we use, it's kind of a nudge theory to get people to protect their houses and themselves more effectively. And so we targeted those areas, and we have seen a significant greater reduction, so 28% reduction across the force area, but up to 40% in some of those areas that we were targeting through that digital advertising. We've also increased a cocooning effort. So cocooning is an effort by the police community support officers, the PCSOs. So they go out, whenever we have a burglary, we do enhanced cocooning now. So they visit all of the houses around, behind the house, in front of the house, and to the sides. And we've grown that. Previously, we would just do maybe 4 or 5 houses in each direction. We're growing the expanse of that. Again, giving that same message, crime prevention messaging. What can you do to help yourselves? You are in a hotspot area. If you do this, you're far less likely. And again, we've seen some really good product and productivity from that as well. We have invested in neighbourhood crime teams over the last 2 years who are focusing, so you're trying to prevent the crime from taking place, but then through the neighbourhood crime team, we're focusing on those perpetrators who are committing the crime. And they tend to be recidivist offenders. So if we effectively tackle those recidivist offenders, we then achieve greater reductions as well. So it's a combined effort across that preventative piece as well as the investigative piece.
Thank you for that question. Anybody else before I jump in? No? Okay. So thank you very much. I'm just going to act as a member of the public, if I may, and ask you to explain some of the things you've said. So one of them being problem-solving plans and policing. Could you explain to people what that means?
Okay. So, sorry. Oh yeah, click on my thing. Okay, so problem-solving plans are have been very much the domain of our neighbourhood policing teams, and what that is about is and it's led by the College of Policing, so led nationally as a academically evaluated success. So we know we have evidence base that if you adopt a problem-solving plan approach to things, you're far more successful at addressing the problem and getting the outcomes that you want. So a problem-solving plan is based on a model which is about scanning what the problem is, assessing it, or analysing it, responding to it, and then assessing the impact. There is all pro formas again from the College of Policing and the National Police Chiefs Council's lead on neighbourhood policing that we all try to follow, which gives us a structure for these problem-solving plans. It's really getting into the depths of what the causation is of the problem, what the drivers are of those problems, working with partners, because it's not always, we can't solve all the problems on our own. There's a lot of societal issues that we need local authorities or health colleagues to work with us on. So the problem-solving plan enables us to understand the problem, engage with the right partners, and then assess how impactful our response has been. Okay.
The follow-up to that is I did have the opportunity to go around Sheffield with the GRIP team, so I saw and experienced what they did. But again, that hotspot policing, would you mind just expanding on that to explain?
Yes, of course. This is the GRIP team is a team that's been funded for the last few years by the government. So from the Home Office, it's funded around, originally it was around most serious violence, so and particularly young people getting involved in knife crime and serious violence. So it's funded from the Home Office, and it enables us to put out additional officers on overtime. So they'd work additional hours into those areas, of greatest need. So we have an analyst that looks right across around the demands, identifies where the greatest demand is, the greatest number of offences in that crime type are, and then we put the officers into those hotspot areas. But it's called a pulse patrol. I'll explain what that is. Again, academic research over many, many years has shown that you're just as impacted by having cops in an area for 15 minutes and then going away and then coming back a few hours later for 15 minutes as you are having them there all the time. And it's decades of academic research. It's led by the University of Cambridge, who are heavily involved with the Home Office around GRIP funding and VRU funding. So we have followed that model over the last few years about pulse patrols into those hotspot areas, and we have seen reductions. I won't attribute all the reductions we've seen to the GRIP teams. We've done a lot of work around offenders, around wider problem solving, but they certainly have contributed significantly to it.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. I'm sorry for putting you on the spot for that. Now, just going back to some of the performance data, if I may, it's great, and I want to acknowledge those positive improvements around 999 calls, call waiting times, increasing that public accessibility, and it's really good to see the downward trend, particularly in burglaries. But as the Scrutiny Board, I just want to pick up some of the other issues, if I may. So you mentioned robberies and that slight increase. So for that assurance purpose, how do we ensure that lens stays on the robberies then, and we look at trends, we look at reasons? So just, thank you.
Thank you, Kilvinder. So we, across my governance regime across the force, we have the 3 ACCs, all of whom own areas of business and priorities for the force. One of those priorities is about neighbourhood crime. Robbery falls into that. So we have a dedicated lead for neighbourhood crime, and then a dedicated lead for robbery within that. So, for example, we've had a lot of analysis done again, particularly around knife-enabled robbery. Over the last 6 to 8 months, it's been a focus of the Home Office task force. So we've been engaged with the Home Office about understanding what the problem is, and then, again, adopting that problem-solving approach of what is the problem, how can we respond to this most effectively in conjunction with our partners, and then assess the impact. We are, interestingly, knife crime is dropping. We've seen a 4 to 5% reduction in knife crime, but we're seeing a slight increase in robbery. So that would suggest that there's less knife-enabled robberies, but we are still seeing a problem around robbery. And this is understanding the investigative capabilities of our staff to investigate that, but again, our problem-solving teams, our neighbourhood teams in the right places at the right times to prevent those offences from taking place in the first place.
Thank you. So it's reassuring it's still on your radar. 100%. Yeah. Thank you. And the final one really is around the drug offending in terms of South Yorkshire has the 5th highest rate of overall drug offending per 100,000 of population, and recognising that the points made around that sort of proactive activities, you put a lens on something, you see more of it. But just in terms, and obviously residents are concerned, and I was able to go out with one of the Operation Duxfords where I witnessed a number of warrants being executed with people where residents were concerned about drug use and in people's houses. I'm just wondering if you could just expand a little bit more around the work being done in this area.
Of course. So again, that same sort of structure, governance structure, so we have dedicated leads around drugs, understanding the impact of drugs, understanding the drugs market because that influences the offending. So we have leads around that, and I absolutely understand the public's concern around drugs. It is an issue for every community, I think it's fair to say. But the higher propensity, or the 5th highest rate, I mean, we as South Yorkshire Police, we tend to be 5th or 6th largest force in the country anyway, so that would be kind of reflective of where we sit in the rankings and the size and the complexity of policing. So I wouldn't say that means that we're an outlier status if we're 5th, because that's about where we should be. But I am actually very pleased about the number and the high levels of drug offences because it's proactive work. If you're a victim of burglary, then that's reported to the police by the victim, obviously to us. Or drugs offending is, or the crime records around drugs offending is where we found it. So we continue to invest, and again, since 2018-19, a significant investment around our Fortify teams. Now, these are the teams that are on each district, so each of the geographical spaces around South Yorkshire, and they focus on primarily drug gangs. So organised crime groups who are heavily involved in drug dealing. So they will be focusing day to day on that activity, responding to intelligence from the public, whether it be directly into us or through Crime Stoppers, responding to that, looking at analysing it, understanding where the greatest need is, and going out and executing warrants. So we have proactive capabilities in each of our district that allows us to focus on this area of business, and this is about reducing the harm that drugs do within our communities, apprehending the offenders, seizing drugs, taking money off criminals who have made a very good lifestyle for themselves out of drugs money. So all of those are the key priorities for those proactive teams. And then sitting above that, we have a team that focuses on the more serious gangs across South Yorkshire. And they, again, focus, not entirely, but a lot of their work will also be drugs related.
Thank you again. My final point. But this is just to talk about Your Voice Matters and the 21% of respondents saying that the police is dealing with things that matter to the community. Lauren, you and your team know that when myself and the Mayor have been out, often people will talk to us about e-bikes, e-scooters, off-road bikes, and just publicly to say at our next public scrutiny board we will be doing road safety, and another future one we'll be doing about rural crime, because again a lot of rural crime involves those off-road bikes. So just to say that's what we hear. We'll come to a public scrutiny board in the next few months to actually do a bit more of a deep dive on it, so we might see that more scrutiny around that. Is that okay? Right, it is coming on to 2:45. I'm going to suggest we have a pause, a 10-minute break, so that you can just have a moment to relax and breathe, and then we'll come back to further substantive items. Is that okay with everybody? So if the webcam can be paused, if our cameraman in the room can be paused, we'll come back in 10 minutes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you everybody for coming back. The next part of the agenda is a focus on violence against women and girls, and before we go into that, I just need to acknowledge in terms of if we needed a start reminder of the reason we're focusing on this in terms of the police and crime plan, that there are 6 million victims, 4 million offenders and 1.5 homicides in relation to violence against women and girls. I think it's important that I say for members of the public who listen in and are in the room and thinking about this, we are focusing, rightly so, on tackling violence against women and girls, but it's really important to acknowledge that men and boys can be victims too, including in domestic abuse and sexual violence. Their experience, though often less visible, is no less valid. But we must ensure that our approach to tackling violence is inclusive, trauma-informed and responsive to all victims. Having said that, the Police and Crime Plan does have violence against women and girls as a core priority, specifically under Priority 2. So having said that, if I may now, I'd like to hand over to ACC Hayley Barnett, who is going to take us through this. And apologies, these slides are not up on the screen. We will fix next. Oh, there you go. Say it and it comes out. Fantastic. That means we're not on camera. Here we go. Over to you, Hayley.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So just following on from that introduction, actually, those figures equate to 1 in 12 women who become victims of violence against women and girls every single year. And in the UK, it follows that there is generally one woman killed by a man every 3 days. So what we are dealing with is so significant, it can't be overstated. The background that's set out on the slide there gives you an indication of obviously some of the legislation that has come about since sort of 2003, which we of course welcome. But it was really in 2021 that there was a real sort of watershed moment with, on the 4th of March, the murder of Sarah Everard, which obviously really galvanised the effort of policing and our partners to bring about some real and sustainable change when it comes into that effort. Obviously since then, the MPCC have gone to great strides to incorporate violence against women and girls within its sort of major strategies. There's been a lot of resource put into it. And then in 2023, the Home Secretary included VAWG in the strategic policing requirement, which really then reinforces the need for policing, and this is looking at policing to make sure that it is providing an effective service, putting the right resources into place for that, and very much as the focus is around serious and organised crime, it is putting that same level of emphasis on it. It then followed that in July 2024 the MPCC declared it a national emergency, and I would tend to agree with that, such as the scale and the things that we are dealing with and tackling day to day. So just moving on to the next slide then, just trying to sort of give an overview of what violence against women and girls really encompasses, because it isn't a single offence type, it is not a crime per se, it is a collective term for a number of different crimes and behaviours, and there's a list there that is set out within the presentation. So it includes things that you would expect, such as rape and other sexual offences, domestic abuse, of course, stalking, harassment, but also honour-based abuse as well, which is often underreported and is very much a focus here in South Yorkshire for us. Coercive and controlling behaviour, which presents itself in often very subtle forms. So there's been a lot of work in relation to training, which I'll come on to later in the presentation. Tech-enabled VAWG, which is a significant threat for us, and again I will touch on that later on. Scott's going to talk about child sexual exploitation. It has a disproportionate impact on women and girls, as does child abuse. And then at the end there, spiking, we still see a number of spiking incidents reported to us, but again an area that is often underreported because it is less well understood. So we've just gone to the next slide. So this just brings it to that sort of local level in South Yorkshire Police here. So if you take the top left-hand graph there, it's no surprise that stalking and harassment, which includes the online element, is one of the highest sort of categories when it comes to reporting. We've seen relatively consistent levels over the sort of last couple of years, but starting to really show that increase now. A lot of that because of our campaigning activity and raising awareness, but most definitely because of the prevalence and the relative ease by which people can perpetrate that type of behaviour online. So that's a real focus for us. You can see there between period 1, which is of January 23 through to June of 24, and then period 2, which we're classifying as January 24 through to June 25. There has been an increase in some sort of offences, notably sort of sexual offences, which includes obviously the rape, but also the non-contact offences such as voyeurism and indecent exposure. But then we have seen a decrease in some of the other offences, violence with injury, so your serious assaults have come into that category, and some of the public order offences. So again, when we look at violence against women and girls, it is, we have to look at the detail that sits behind that title, because it's only through that and understanding the actual types of behaviours that we can begin to really target those and obviously protect people. So we're going to the next slide. So recorded offences. So the volume of VAWG investigations has decreased slightly. But again, I think that follows a concerted sort of effort over the last couple of years, and we're starting to see things sort of balance out now. The cases where action's been taken, so that is where the police has achieved a certain outcome, has again remained relatively sort of static at 11%. And again, just to reiterate, this is looking across all of those categories, taken as a whole. You'll see a bit of a step change there in November 2022, whereby if you look at the sort of the pink line at the top, which represents other outcomes, and then just below that you've got the sort of purpley section, which is something called Outcome 22s, and that relates to diversionary activity. In November 22, there was a national direction to exclude domestic violence protection notices from that, and we responded to that immediately. So you'll see the outcomes for Outcome 22 and diversionary activity has reduced, but just want to sort of have that clarity there. We are still looking for suitable diversionary activities for perpetrators, because in some cases, in fact many cases, it is entirely appropriate to use those sorts of interventions in order to try and address their behaviour and prevent obviously reoffending. Our focus really now going forward in terms of achieving those outcomes is to reduce the amount of outcome 16s, and those are the ones whereby the victim does not support a prosecution or a particular outcome. Now, for that, it's about trying to understand at which point a victim is disengaging. It might be they don't engage from the outset, and understanding why that is, so we can obviously help provide that, support and increase confidence. But we recognise, obviously, across the, this is bigger than policing. The whole judicial system has a huge part to play in this, and of course there are pressures within the court system. So between us and our partners, we're really making sure that we are trying to provide support to the victims throughout the entirety of that experience, to keep them engaged, to keep them having that confidence in us and our partners, so they can have the strength really to continue right the way towards that sort of outcome. So we move on to the next slide. So this just outlines the sort of strategic approach that we take here in South Yorkshire, and just to sort of set the scene a little bit. So I'm the executive lead as Assistant Chief Constable, so I'm the portfolio for VAWG. We have a dedicated strategic lead who's a detective superintendent who looks across the entirety of VAWG, again recognising that it encompasses things like rape and serious sexual offending, to make sure we've got that real strategic focus there. And then we have a VAWG tactical lead who helps coordinate all of that activity. And it's at that layer and below really that the activity is really done and the difference is made. So there is real expertise that sits within those individuals. That tactical lead also chairs the independent advisory group that the Deputy Chief Constable spoke of earlier on. And then you've got the VAWG leads across all of the VAWG offence types. So we have specific leads for stalking, harassment, domestic abuse, sex workers, honour-based abuse, female genital mutilation, and also RASO. And then we link across, and this is where, and I'll cover it more in the next slide, but all of our work, we make sure we're absolutely aligned to the national agenda and the national strategy as well, because there's a lot of activity going on there in that space to build an evidence base, to understand what works, what doesn't, etc. So we operate very much in conjunction with that. So the VAWG pillar leads are directly derived from that national strategy. So looking at trust and confidence, pursuing perpetrators and creating safe spaces. Now when it comes to creating safe spaces, more recently we've obviously understood this for for some time, but we've now separated creating safe spaces leads out into online and offline, such as that growing prevalence of online behaviour and criminality. All of that helps to deliver our safeguarding and vulnerability strategy, and from that we have a number of different delivery plans that set out the detail of what we will do across something called the 4P plan. The 4P plan was derived from the Serious Organised Crime Strategy, and it's around pursuing offenders, prevention, protecting and preparing ourselves. So what you see in there is again directly attributed to that. So that gives you a little bit more detail about the 4P plan, and this isn't the entirety of it, it's a very detailed plan, but these just give you some of the headlines that I thought would be of interest to yourselves as a panel and also the public today. So in preparing ourselves, obviously we have that strategic governance, which I've just spoken about, and we will touch on that throughout the entirety of all of our presentations today. But that's really about embedding VAWG into force policy and strategy. It's about bringing those strategies to life and making sure it is delivered at every part of the organisation, from the moment that one of our force control room handlers picks up the phone right the way through to supporting somebody through to a criminal justice outcome. It's very much about the training of our staff, which the Deputy Chief Constable has spoken briefly about. We concluded that training at the beginning of this month. It has had really positive feedback. We have covered things like trauma-informed responses. We've looked at some of the very specific issues that are affecting sex workers in South Yorkshire Police as well, very much informed by the partners and the third sector that we work with to really understand that. We've very much looked at the the importance of language and supporting those people whose perhaps English isn't their first language as well, and how we can make sure we're using interpreter services and so forth. So moving on to prevent, the VAWG Independent Advisory Group, which I'll touch on a little bit more in the next slide. Creating safe spaces, of course, both publicly and online. We have the Ask Angela campaign that is very much understood and well embedded, and our partners very much invest in that, as do the private sector. And then the No More campaign again, which I'll touch a little bit more on. Protective orders, I will cover. Workforce support group, so our workforce, which is several thousand people, who many of which live and work, well, they certainly work in South Yorkshire, but they sort of live in South Yorkshire and have family members here. They are also often victims of these types of offences, so it's making sure we've got the relevant support in place for them to make sure that through that they're able to provide the very best service that they can to the public. And then the Walk Safe app, which we've been using now probably for the last year, which gives people who enjoy the nighttime economy different options around sort of safe spaces if they feel in danger or they're uncomfortable in their particular environment, and it's something that we're looking at evaluating at the moment before obviously we progress any further with that. So Pursue, our effort in policing, we obviously a lot of our business is done in partnership. Pursue is very much the role of the police, so this is one of those areas that we really invest in. We have a VAWG dashboard that allows us to see those individuals who are perpetrating the highest harm, whether that's by frequency, so somebody who is frequently abusing women and girls, or it's somebody that's committing some of the highest harm offences that require that attention. Much of what we do through them has already been picked up through sort of MARIC arrangements, for example, making sure those victims are being well supported through those, through IOM arrangements, but there are some individuals who do not sit in natural offender management arrangements, and it's those that we then put that wraparound service to make sure that we're looking for all opportunities to disrupt them, to deter their activities, and make sure that if they are committing any offences, whether it's against violence against women or girls or other, that we are taking all opportunities to bring them to justice. The stalking clinics sort of really reach into our ability, our sort of efforts really to use protective orders, and I'll talk a little bit more about the inroads that we've made there. Touched upon IOM, which again we use very extensively, and Operation Soteria, which is the national initiative that we're very much invested as a leading force in relation to our efforts for RASO. Go on to the next slide then. So I mentioned protective measures. So one of the things that we're particularly proud of in South Yorkshire is our commitment to be really proactive in our use of orders, but also in our use of intelligence rather than waiting for something to be reported to us, we want to obviously identify where there's harm taking place. So we use the domestic violence disclosure scheme quite extensively. In fact, we're one of the leading forces in the use of right to know cases. There's two different types: right to know, which is basically about the police triggering the need to make a disclosure to a potential victim, so perhaps a woman who's just started a relationship with somebody we know to be a domestic abuse perpetrator, and we use that to really good effect. And then there's the right to ask, which is generally where a loved one or somebody who has a concern for somebody else asks the police if a disclosure can be made. So this is what is mostly known as Clare's Law. So we make really good use, and the graph there, the top left, shows how that's sort of been increasing in both the right to know and the right to ask. We have a number of stalking spots, so they're individuals who have a high level of expertise and knowledge in relation to stalking, and they, working with our legal services, make sure that we're using stalking protection orders as often as we reasonably can. Notwithstanding, these are civil court orders, and we have to go through a certain process to achieve those. And then just on that last bullet point there, we consistently use MARIC, so the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference for domestic violence victims, generally those that are deemed to be high risk. We use it a lot. It does create pressures within our systems, and certainly for our partners as well, but it is an effective means of putting preventative plans around victims to safeguard them from perpetrators. And then the bottom slide there, or the bottom column, is around our use of domestic violence protection notices and then those subsequent applications for orders. Again, we use them at a high rate compared to other forces here in South Yorkshire. So that's very much around protecting victims by very much concentrating on the perpetrators. So go on to the next slide. So we touched on, or the Deputy touched on, the Independent Advisory Group. So established back in 2021, this was really in recognition of the fact that we need to work with our community members, with those individuals and professionals who are advocates for victims and survivors, to make sure that they have a real role in shaping police policy and practice. Because it would be very remiss of us to plough on without bringing in that sort of learning and understanding, and being very much open to adjusting and improving our practice day to day, week to week. So that group was formed, and it's gone from strength to strength throughout. It is really diverse now. It brings in a number of victims and survivors, but also, as I mentioned, victim advocates, people who are working with victims and survivors, day to day, to really understand this, helping us to see their experiences through their eyes. So they've helped support, and I'll just sort of fast forward on to the end, have helped support or shape practice that would include things like the RASO, so the Rape and Serious Sexual Offences Closure Letter. Now, for a victim to be told that their case is not being pursued is quite significant, of course, and we don't underestimate that. So we wanted to make sure that that letter was supportive, it was clear in its language, and we've taken all of the feedback and incorporated it in that letter, which is now used. Nationally, there is a similar letter. It is, in our view, probably not as good as the one that has been produced by us, because it is completely relevant to our communities here in South Yorkshire, and it's directly listening to their voices and their experiences. The IAG has also directly informed our campaigns as well, which I'll touch on. It also brings in an extra layer of accountability as well, because we are asking, how does this particular service feel for our victims, so that we can adjust going forward. And it's ultimately about building trust and confidence, so people have the trust to come forward, whether it's to policing or our partners as well, because often, partners are probably better placed to take those initial initial reports, and then obviously work with us to support them through a criminal justice outcome if that is the right thing for that particular victim. And they've also directly informed the training that I spoke about earlier on as well. I've had a big part to play in that, and I'm really grateful for all of the work of the IAG members who freely give their time to support keeping our community safe. So public engagement then, again IAG informed. So there's a series of campaigns which are collectively known as the No More campaigns, who've looked at different elements of offending behaviour. So the No More campaign was very much around supporting women and girls to say Stay Safe Online. We rolled that out sort of summer, autumn of last year. Gail, who's here, has had a huge part to play in that. It's been really successful in sort of extending our reach out into all sectors of South Yorkshire, but predominantly targeted at those who we know are least likely to be safe online, whether it's people who are in the public eye, whether it's students who are perhaps using the internet for research, etc., and who are particularly vulnerable to that type of behaviour. The No More, as in the NO More, supporting women and girls to stay safe in public places, and again that was very much around the sort of the nighttime economy experience, making sure that people are safe to enjoy the nighttime economy here in South Yorkshire. And I'll just fast forward because I'm conscious of time. The impact of all of that, which is obviously the aim, is to make a difference in those sorts of campaigns, has led to an increase in the VAWG investigations, which has an online flag, and that's increased by 16.5%. Harassment investigations have increased by 23%, and stalking investigations by 58%. So it has had a meaningful impact in making sure that we now are in a position to undertake investigations and obviously try and tackle the perpetrators to make sure that people are safe. So finally on to the key challenges and risks then. So I touched on this, the cyber-enabled VAWG threat and risk is very much born out of the real pace of the technological changes. The online safety bill, has provided some levers to help support that, but it's about keeping pace with that and the individual perpetrators' efforts to try and get round some of those mechanisms that are there and designed to try and make it safer online. We often find that people find ways of getting around it. So it's about how we work to sort of keep pace with that. So we're working with the Regional Organised Crime Unit, who've supported some of the training that I spoke about earlier on. And part of that is obviously about making sure that we are providing good, sound advice for people so they can go about their business online, so they're not having to stay away from the internet if that is their job or if that is what they do to enjoy their time off. But actually there are things that people can do to stay safe online. Then it's also about that pursuit element and the investigations that we then undertake where offences are committed. So it's making sure that obviously we're able to use the right capabilities to identify offenders. A big challenge is a lot of offenders are overseas, and obviously that brings some legislative challenges, which again we are working with the ROCU and the wider law enforcement family to try and overcome that. The VAWG dashboard, of course, has a big part to play in that, and how we bring that to bear for the online offending, which is trickier, but of course we look at things like IP addresses and so forth. Identifying addressing areas of VAWG under reporting. So the Deputy talked about the work that we're doing at the moment through the Independent Advisory Group to really understand why people don't come forward, and it's going beyond statements of it might be because of a cultural issue that's preventing people coming forward, but what does that really mean? Why is it that a particular group aren't able to come forward to policing or our partners? So we want to really understand the psychology and the behaviours that sit behind that in order that we can really bespoke our response and that of our partners to encourage people to come forward and make sure at the point they do, we get that sort of critical moment absolutely right, because we know that there are high levels of disengagement as well amongst some of those communities. And then finally, supporting workforce survivors and maintaining standards of professionalism. So right the way back to the beginning of this and that landmark moment in 2021 with Sarah Everard, policing let her down and her family, and there was a number of cases around that time. We have to look inwards as much as we look outwards when it comes to tackling this issue. A workforce the size of South Yorkshire is not immune to some of the disgraceful attitudes and behaviours that we see out in society. So we absolutely need to tackle that, and that's very much a part of our efforts at the moment, but also supporting those individuals who become victims within the organisation so they can better support the public.
Thank you very much, Hayley, for that honest and open presentation. So again, just looking around the table for people who may wish to make a comment or ask a question from that presentation.
Very good.
Okay.
Thanks, Hayley. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd just note that this is this is obviously much broader than policing, so you focused on all those activities that you're doing there, but I think it's important we recognise this is a sort of generational challenge for the country. A huge amount of this is around challenging misogynistic behaviours, cultural values, the development of positive male role models, and I think kind of there's a lot of work that kind of needs to happen outside of policing, and you're essentially picking up the pieces and supporting people who've been through these horrific events. I think we need to bear that in mind, and that's a big part of our thinking when we're working with partners who aren't just policing. I think within that there is this emerging trend around sort of social media particularly, and I think kind of the radicalisation or the overexposure of quite sort of sinister stuff to young people, and I guess it'd be interesting to touch on a little bit more about the kind of your sense of your capacity to tackle that online threat, both in terms of the capability you have and you touched on, but also I guess resourcing is always a key point here as well.
This morning about that. The Violence Reduction Unit has a big part to play in that, in bringing all those partners together and the experience and expertise that sits in them. I think the second part is very much around how we use technology, and that's where the Regional Organised Crime Unit and the National Crime Agency obviously have a part to play in that, and they are very much sort of flexing into this space. But then it's how, you know, it is huge, the internet is huge. Policing the internet is frankly impossible. So it's about how do we use some of the automative tools to scan that. But then it's that clarity, isn't it, to our officers and staff members about what is policing's responsibility. It's been clear about what criminal offences is versus actually some of those behaviours that we absolutely need to monitor and get upstream of them, and then that back into that education again.
Thank you. Just to add to that, we did have the Violence Reduction Unit workshop this morning, and on our table we did discuss how that cyber-enabled violence against particularly women and girls, and one of the things raised was, you know, the level of pornography that is being shown to children, and the things that are being shown are acts that are, you know, would be illegal, and encouraging children to do those things. And I raised that simply because of the problem we've got that is a, like you say, a societal one, this generation issue, and that we need to do more on it, and it's something I know you're engaged with the safeguarding element as well, so it is something, you know, that we need to work more on, I think, as a priority over this year and the following one, so thank you for that. Does anybody else have any observations or questions they'd like to ask? You did explain the right to ask and right to know, so thank you for that. That was something I'd written down, but you went on to explain that. Something about the stalking protection orders around the discrepancy between the number of applicants and the full orders granted. Is that something you could expand on?
Yeah, so the stalking protection orders are less straightforward than the domestic violence protection orders. There are a lot more points that we need to cover off before we can secure the orders. So there's generally sort of two hearings. There's an interim hearing, and this is where the interim orders bit comes into place, because you see here there's the interim orders in place, 3, and those are generally where a order cannot be agreed at the first hearing, and then it goes to a full hearing, which is generally some time down the road, and this presents some real challenges for us in terms of how we keep that victim safe whilst an order isn't in place. With a domestic violence protection order, we can put a protection notice in place within the time that the perpetrator is in custody, authorised by a superintendent. It is a court order that we need to get when it comes to stalking protection orders. So there's a series of steps that need to take place, and you see attrition at each of those levels. You then move on to a full hearing, and this is where the full SPOs are granted. Now, along the way, there are a number of cases where perpetrators are convicted of criminal offences because in many cases a criminal investigation is still ongoing as well, and of course our first priority is to bring about a criminal investigation. Orders are generally a sort of bolt on to that to sort of really bolster the safeguarding activity. So once you've got a conviction in place and you might have sort of some restriction, the person might have been imprisoned, the order then doesn't become necessary. So again, you see reasonable, there's reasons for those orders no longer being necessary, and therefore not going from the application point 99 all the way down to you've got full SPOs with much smaller numbers.
Thank you very much.
Explains that.
Thank you.
It's a long, convoluted version, but just thought hopefully that'll explain.
If there's no other questions, I'll jump in.
I was going to ask one more, but you please go ahead. No, go ahead.
Just going back to the investigations, and there's a quite large number that there's a named suspect, but the victim as such doesn't want to pursue it. You said that's an area of focus, which is obviously really important. Just could you unpack a little bit about what you think are the drivers there and what you might be doing to sort of improve those statistics?
So. In a survey, it was a national survey undertaken by one of the London universities, and we were the leading force when it came to the number of participants in that survey, and that was about us really, committed to continually learning, understanding what it is that we can do better at all levels, so across the investigation and through that criminal justice system. So really trying to understand why people are disengaging is a big part of it. And I know obviously SIMCA are doing some work in relation to RASO to understand what's happening within the criminal justice system and again where we can intervene. Drawing upon sort of academic research, again working with the IAG and trying to improve our data collection as well. So when we move to a new force system, our ability to understand where people drop off and then to ask the question what has led to that will become an easier feat. It is quite challenging at the moment to be able to hone in on a particular point in time throughout the sort of investigation where there is the drop-off. So yeah, it's very much around increasing our understanding. We're looking at it from various directions.
Sorry, Matt, I'll just add one small thing to that. Absolutely everything that Hayley said is entirely right. But there is also the point, and understanding at what point the victim disengages is really important, because there are a number of victims who never wanted the police to be made aware, who never reported it to us. It was a neighbour, it was the sister, it was you, and we have quite, in violence against women and girls, that is particularly prominent. So trying to understand those outcome 16, because it's a very broad brush approach, so we need to understand kind of what, was it pre-calling the police, was it within the first 24 hours, was it, we need to understand that so that we can adapt what we do to cater for the needs of the victims. And it goes back to some of the commentary in the last few days that's involved the HMI and the Commissioner of the Met regarding national crime recording standards and various other things. So there is some things that are completely out of our control in this space, but we can't, because of the clumsiness of the data collection, we're not yet able to articulate that or understand it, and I think that's absolutely key as we move forward.
Thank you. Just my last one before we move on. And you mentioned it, you brought it into focus around when the police have let down people and individuals, and you talk about Sarah Everard, and I was just thinking around that police legitimacy and professional standards, that includes things like vetting procedures and complaint handlings. Is there anything more you could expand on that for us?
Well, if it complaints, I will defer to the Deputy Master.
Yeah, so I own all vetting and professional standards across the organisation, and there's been a huge amount of work in this space, as you can imagine, not just Sarah Everard and Cousins, but also Carrick and other high-profile cases across the country. We've had objective HMIC inspections across the vetting regime, really tightening our vetting space. We're very proud here in South Yorkshire that we have one of the highest levels of vetting. So we conduct additional checks on top of what is the minimum standard in authorised professional practice dictated to us by the College of Policing. So I feel we're in a relatively strong place. This hasn't always been the case, but certainly in the last 4 or 5 years we have strengthened our position considerably around vetting. So I feel confident in that space now, more so than probably any of my predecessors have.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I don't know if the Chief Constable wants to come in on that or...
No,
Thank you very much. Thank you again for that presentation and answering the questions. So before I move on to the next agenda item, I just need to restate that this Public Scrutiny Board is to focus on current matters and not historic cases or investigations. It is important that I acknowledge that the horrific impact on grooming gangs has had and continue to have on victims. I also want to thank those victims for their bravery, for coming forward and helping us ensure that lessons can be learned to improve our understanding, but also our response, or the police's response, to investigating child sexual exploitation. We appreciate that local communities, members of the public, want to have more transparency, and we hope to be providing that today, and will continue to do that. We're not going to discuss any live investigations or further reviews. I do, however, want to give Lauren, the Chief Constable, an opportunity to speak before we move on to how South Yorkshire Police provide assurances that lessons have been learned around child sexual exploitation, and before we provide an overview of the current situation. So may I pass on to you, Chief Constable?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And like you, it is my clear focus that we focus on this scheme today and how we safeguard the victims of the future. But I think it's absolutely appropriate in this, our first public accountability meeting, that I acknowledge our past. South Yorkshire Police does have a legacy that is stained by our historical response to child sexual exploitation. This legacy was first exposed by victim survivors and a national journalist back in 2011, and since then has been deeply explored by the likes of Professor Alexis Jay and Baroness Louise Casey in independent reports and reviews. I don't seek to deny or fudge any of the content of those reports. We acknowledge our historic failings, and we have done so publicly for some time. I repeat that acknowledgement here today. I also repeat my own personal apologies as today's Chief Constable to those girls, and looping back to the previous topic, they were girls, who were subjected to such dreadful harm and in some cases continue to suffer the consequences. We should have done better. What I do seek today to do is to provide you with the reassurance about the South Yorkshire Police of today. I came to this force back in 2017, and at that time there had already been significant development in the understanding of and partnership response to child sexual exploitation. The South Yorkshire Police of today, 2025, has transformed its approach to child sexual exploitation since 2011. We work with our partners at both the tactical and the strategic level to identify risk, safeguard vulnerable before harm occurs, and to tackle offending, with all agencies committing dedicated and highly trained resources. CSE investigations are subject to rigorous scrutiny, which you will see some of that this afternoon, at every level throughout the force and in a partnership setting both locally and nationally. Since I became the Chief Constable back in 2021, we, as part of the Safeguarding Partnership in Rotherham, commissioned an independent review around CSE practice there, and that reported good practice occurring across the partnership. We were also one of the forces visited as part of the National HMICFRS thematic inspection. We've regularly invited interested parties, including local politicians and members of the press, to come and see how we work collectively around CSE. And that is an invitation I reiterate to you and other stakeholders here today. So child sexual exploitation and abuse does sit within the crime portfolio, which is overseen by ACC Hayley Barnett. Before the main presentation is given by DCI Scott Harrison, I'm just going to ask Hayley to give you an overview of the really comprehensive governance structure that we have in place today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I think, as would be expected, our force governance arrangements very much reflect nationally sort of recognised structures around the operational, tactical, strategic delivery. But I really want to firstly focus on some of the additionality that we have in place in light of the progress and in light of the history that the Chief has just spoken about there, and how we particularly oversee and drive delivery in relation to child exploitation, also child sexual exploitation, and then how that fits into the wider arrangement. So firstly, at a district level, so we have 4 districts in South Yorkshire, we have multi-agency child exploitation panels. Now, these are weekly or fortnightly meetings determined by the intelligence case, and I'll emphasise the intelligence there because it's very much around a proactive response, again, as I mentioned earlier, not reactive. And this is chaired by one of the South Yorkshire Police Detective Inspectors in conjunction with local safeguarding managers. And the MACE is really about taking a strong and robust victim-focused approach to safeguarding children who are at risk of exploitation. Running alongside those meetings, we have the Child Exploitation Tasking and Coordinating Groups. These are monthly and they're chaired by South Yorkshire Police, again in each of the districts. And those meetings draw upon monthly and quarterly analytical products, which are really sound, to identify suspects and then coordinate a suspect-focused approach. Again, taking that proactive stance rather than reacting, and again, looking at preventative and intervention sort of opportunities. Then looking at force level, we have the monthly force level child sexual exploitation tactical meetings, and that's chaired by a force tactical lead. And this really then looks at the emerging trends across the organisation and brings across the shared learning as well from the districts and making sure that we address any cross-district offending through that coordination. We then have the monthly PVP, so Protecting Vulnerable People Performance Meeting, chaired by the PVP Performance and Governance Superintendent. And through that meeting, they scrutinise performance measures across the districts, but also across all protecting vulnerable people strands, which includes child exploitation and child sexual exploitation. It's also of note that that team, or the performance and governance team, have an audit capability, and there's regular audit and scrutiny as part of our commitment to that ongoing improvement, which includes audit in the child exploitation and sexual exploitation space. And then moving into some of the wider governance arrangements that the force has anyway, to strategic level, I chair the Safeguarding and Vulnerability Assurance Board for the force, where the strategic and thematic leads provide me with the assurance that they're effectively delivering against the relevant delivery plans, which includes those for CCE and CSE, which are both incorporated within the South Yorkshire Policing Safeguarding and Vulnerability Strategy that I mentioned in the VAWG presentation. We also have a Force Performance Day, which is chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable, and through that, which is a monthly meeting, the Deputy holds all leads to account for performance in their respective areas of leadership and management. So exploitation, expectedly, is a regular feature as part of what we call the regular insight spotlight, the spotlight sessions, where leads present on the given areas of business at the Deputy Chief Constable's direction. The most recent one was about child exploitation, covering county lines and child sexual exploitation within that meeting. We also have the weekly strategic meetings, or business meetings, command team meetings that the Chief Constable chairs, where we as portfolio leads, as Assistant Chief Constables and Assistant Chief Officers, talk about our portfolio risk, any emerging issues, whether it's nationally or locally, but also then on a fortnightly basis, the Chief holds us to account for any performance exceptions, and we have a regular reporting mechanism that comes into that meeting that the Chief obviously has sight of before, and obviously we go through those in some detail where necessary. We also still have the Operation Stovewood governance in place. So whilst Operation Stovewood is being phased out at the moment, as South Yorkshire Police take over any new investigations. So Operation Stovewood was the NCA investigation, which began in 2014, investigating non-familial child sexual exploitation in Rotherham, which took place between 1997 and 2013. There are still a number of cases that are coming to trial both this year and into next year, so there's still governance around that. So I chair a quarterly Stovewood Strategic Coordinating Group in conjunction with the National Crime Agency and partners at Rotherham as well, and that's to provide the assurance in both the investigations but the ongoing support to victims and survivors as well, and the ongoing partnership arrangements in terms of ongoing prevention. And then finally, the Chief Constable chairs a Stovewood Assurance meeting, which is held quarterly, where the Deputy Director of the NCA, who leads on the Stovewood investigation, provides assurance to the Chief Constable in terms of the outcomes, the ongoing investigation, and also those transitional arrangements back into South Yorkshire Police for those new investigations. So, as you'd expect, with all those new investigations now being the responsibility of South Yorkshire Police, it's important that that aforementioned governance that I've spoken about continues to be really robust, and we will still operate in that fashion in order that we can continue to protect the most vulnerable people and bring offenders to justice. So I'll now hand over to Detective Chief Inspector Harrison, who can tell you more about what we're doing in South Yorkshire to protect our young people.
This presentation is obviously going to focus into aspects of CSE, but you have to understand the wider context around CSA first. So when I say CSA, that's in relation to child sexual abuse. what I'll do is we work through the slides. I'll make it really clear at which point what we're talking about here. We're talking about the bigger picture around CSA, or we're talking about the distinct features of CSE within some of the slides and the metrics that you'll see. So, Sally, yes, thank you. So, as has been already explained, there's been a number of key milestones, a number of key reports that have been produced over the years that's not just influenced the way that South Yorkshire Police actually now approach CSE, but nationally. And I think it's really important to recognise that those reports had a number of key themes within them, and highlighted there is really a summary of those key themes. So we're talking about what was said as a lack of governance, a lack of sharing of intelligence, a lack of support or identification of children that was at risk, and a real lack of partnership working. So that was then, and as has been quite rightly said by the Chief just a moment ago, that isn't now. And what I'll do now as we go through the next slides is really look to kind of reinforce the position that the force now finds itself in, and the way that we approach this and the levels of scrutiny that we put behind it. So touching on what I said right at the beginning, it's really important just to focus in on the fact that CSA is a rather large area of policing and a rather large area that covers a number of distinct methods of operating, so MOs in terms of crime styles. CSE is a subset of CSA, and what you can see from the slide there is that over the course of the last 12 months, South Yorkshire Police investigated over 3,000 crimes, investigations that involve children, subject to CSA. But of that, there was 152 of those investigations that was distinctively linked to CSE. And again, breaking that down in terms of the context behind group-based offending and individual-based offending, about a third of those investigations were group-based in the last 12 months. The key aspect of the slide that you see before you now, though, is around our focus in relation to our safeguarding. So when we talk about safeguarding, this is child protection. So we call it non-crimes, but it's child protection investigations. And as a force lead, what I always want to see is that our child protection investigations are obviously going to outweigh and be a lot higher than our crimes, because that means that we're doing what we say we're going to do in terms of preventing this offending from taking place in the first place. And you can see there that our actual child protection investigations are over double the number of crimes that we recorded. Like I said. The threat is changing. There is no doubt about it. Some of the reports that we mentioned right at the beginning didn't even infer around online offending. And online offending now is a heavy feature within abuse against children. And whilst I accept that not all online offending is CSE, it can be. And we have methods of being able to identify that and different ways of being able to deal with that should we find it. I think the key aspects to look at there is that with new threats becomes new methods, new ways of working, new ways of operating with our partners to ensure that actually we are protecting and preventing that harm. We see new risks within this space around peer-on-peer offending, which we've not really seen before. So this is potentially people of school age offending. We see AI and the advancements within technology, which make investigating crime like this really difficult. We now bring in international aspects, which we don't see within the offline type of offending, and bring all that together with some really serious harm groups that we're now starting to see. They are nationally and they are within South Yorkshire in relation to self-harm groups that are actually intent on causing harm on individuals and potentially leading to suicide. Such is the threat that we're dealing with within this child sexual abuse space. Yes, Sally. And as challenging as it is, we are showing the signs of improvements there. I think this is a really important slide for showing that aspect of trust and confidence within policing. You can see that historically, shall we call it, the delayed reporting and the non-recent reporting outweighed our recent reporting. And by recent, I mean within the last 14 days of the offence actually being occurring. You can see now that actually due to our response to this in terms of our proactive approach, our early engagement, our use of partners, you can see now that the tide is starting to turn with those metrics on the screen, whereby now over half of our investigations now are actually within that year, whereas before that wasn't the case. And I think that's a really important point to sort of bring home. Now, we wasn't able to, the data was available to us, but not broken down to this level, up to 2024, to look at the difference between individual-based offending and group-based offending. And I think what's really key to point out here is when I talk about group-based offending, there's a key definition that we have to apply to that. And that definition basically is saying more than 2 offenders with a common purpose of causing harm. That is not to be confused with organised crime gangs and things that you might have heard about. So this data is not saying that this is being committed by organised crime gangs. It can be, but actually what this data is pointing out to us is this is people acting more than lone offenders. And I think it's really important to point that out because of the perceptions around sort of gangs and groups. The difference between gangs and groups. Thanks, Sally. Okay, apologies for this slide in some respects because it is a busy slide and there's a lot of information here. But the key aspects I'll summarise. And I think what's really important to point out is that we can't deal with and approach this area without understanding what the profile looks like. And that's for victims as much as it is for suspects. Because if we don't know who to protect, how do we get the right services in place for those individuals? And we will point out the fact that there are gaps within this data. Some of those gaps are down to, it's been explained earlier, around sort of some of our technical difficulties. But actually some of these gaps are nothing to do with the way that the police collect the data. It relies 100% on the cooperation of the person we're talking to give us their self-defined ethnicity, for example. So you'll see down the side that there are aspects of self-defined ethnicity is the largest area of which we don't actually have a data set. But from the data that's available to us, we can still draw a profile from it. If I was to summarise what you see there, it would suggest that overwhelmingly our victims are female. There are male victims. There are male victims within that data set, but in really, really small numbers. And that's something we have to be aware of, and that has to be something that we put some attention towards. When you start to think about the sort of risk cohort of ages, you'll see that that's between 12 to 14. Nationally, what we tend to see is the picture of younger people, younger children, being more involved in the online activities. When it comes to appearances data is something that the police can judge by looking at the person that they have before them. And you can see there that the majority of our victims are white in appearance. And that is obviously in relation to, although we do start to see, I should say, other identities within offline and group-based offending. When it comes to the self-defined ethnicity, of which the police have 18 different codes to be able to extract information from, we have 77% of the data available to us in the slide that you see there. That is higher than most police forces can report upon. So whilst we are not proud of the fact it's 77%, and we do try our best to improve on that picture, it's more data than most police forces have actually got available to them. From that, you can see it's overwhelmingly represented by white British, so white British females in this case. So headlines, I think, really around that slide, Deputy Mayor, is that there is a distinct lack and potential for underreporting within the male victim cohort and also within minority groups. And that is something that we talked earlier about IAGs within VAWG. That is something that we can also look to explore the reasons why within those forums and those settings too. So the next slide looks very similar, but this is focusing in on suspects. So again, as I said right at the beginning of the previous slide, really, really important that we understand who our suspects are so that we're able to combat that in partnership. And again, the self-defined ethnicity presents itself as a gap, And again, I reiterate the point that some of that is down to the lack of information coming from the suspect. Despite that, the profile does tell us that males and females are represented as suspects within the data, males more predominantly within the offline and group-based methods, and females tend to be found more within the online space. And that leads into what we spoke about with peer-on-peer types of offences, which could be committed by females. And we have something that's called FMSE, which is financially motivated sexual exploitation, which we have cases of females being the suspects of that against males and females. When we start to look at ages, it's a really scattered picture, really difficult to kind of get a grip of that slide or that part of the slide. What we can say, though, is that the biggest cohort in relation to offline offending is between that 24 and 34 age range, but 18 to 24 is only 2% lower. So that's quite a wide area there to look at. In regard to online offending, the biggest cohort is between 0 and 17. And I've looked into that a little bit deeper, and obviously that is in relation to the aspects we've talked about, child-on-child offending, peer-on-peer types of MO. Appearance data. So the appearance data of our suspects shows that the volume of suspects are white, but in group-based offending we do start to see a different complexion, with around 50% of our suspects being non-white in appearance. When we look at the picture around self-defined ethnicity in that area of suspects, we have 18, as I said earlier, we've got 18 codes that we can use. And when we look specifically at those 17 group-based offences that are highlighted on there, around group-based work, you'll see that 11 of those investigations relate to white British offenders, meaning that 35% are in relation to people that self-define as non-white British. And I think, Deputy Mayor, the conclusion that we can draw from that is that the data is showing us that there is a disproportionate percentage via self-defined ethnicity of white British offenders, of non-white British offenders that are linked to group-based offending. And that's when you compare that to the census data of 2021. Sally? So just taking us slightly in a different direction now, just to talk about the strategy, and it's something that you became aware of only moments ago in relation to our 4P plans. So these are looking at the prevention techniques, the prepare, so our understanding of the threat, how well we protect individuals exposed to this, and how well we pursue them. So we have a strategy there, and a way of working, and a way that I hold myself accountable to the developments and the advancements against that strategy. But also what you're able to see on the right-hand side of that slide is our ways of working. So some of those reports talked about a lack of governance. Well, there's some governance there in terms of how we operate now in partnership, and the actual extent and the wide-ranging capabilities we have within these teams as a result of working in partnership to combat it. But it's complicated, and as you can see in relation to the picture here, this is a snapshot of something called MACE, which is the multi-agency child exploitation aspects. And what you can see there is that this process represents our approach to safeguarding. So these are bespoke plans for children that have been identified as being at risk by a partner agency or by the police, and they've been moved into the MACE process to be safeguarded. And what you can see there is that at that moment when I was taking this snapshot, we had 49 children that was in MACE in relation to child sexual exploitation. We also use MACE for child criminal exploitation as well, worthy of note. But what you can see there is that there is a wide variety of vulnerabilities that needs a partnership approach to be able to manage those children in a way that gets the best from them, gives them the best possible support and the best possible position to be able to move forward with their lives. That slide highlights those vulnerabilities, but it also looks to show the fact that our victims can come from conventional home settings, but also from care settings. Children as child exploitation can feature in any of those areas. clearly identifies, I think, this slide more than anything, why we need that partnership approach. But more importantly, it talks about the techniques we use to actually safeguard these children. Talked earlier about the trauma-led approach and child-centred approach to the aspects of this, and that is really, really important to be able to understand the position of that child and how they actually became to be involved in this in the first place, so that we can try and eradicate that, so that the suspects who are always to blame for this are the ones that we focus on. So, as you can probably appreciate, this is a busy area for us. There's always a lot happening within this space. This slide really is looking to move on to the so what, and how is it impacting and what difference is it making. And for some of these areas that you see on the slide there, we will have measurables, statistics and metrics, but actually some of them come out within other types of criminal justice outcomes around disruptions. We'll talk about in terms of case studies on the next slide that I can give you, where we take a different approach to being able to disrupt this type of criminality. This slide really is about defining why we do things and the value, trying to gain the value that it adds into our approach. And again, this is an approach that we didn't have when some of those earlier reports were formulated, and this is something now that is absolutely key and drives our business. We're also really clear, a bit in green at the bottom, around what our next steps are and what our next priorities are, because we will never sit here and say that we have solved this. This is an area of policing that is ever evolving, ever developing, and we're forever learning. But it's important that we always have our priorities, and you can see at the bottom there we've got some key priorities at the moment, things that's been in the media quite recently around the Baroness Casey's report and some of the recommendations there that policing and partners need to deliver upon. It also looks, for me, as a force lead within South Yorkshire, to improve consistency. So have we got the consistent level of partners across our 4 districts within South Yorkshire? We clearly need to invest always within victim-led training, making sure that our first responders, whether that be the call centres, whether that be the police officers, are fully aware of their language and how they use that language to speak with our victims. To disrupt offending, I'll take anything. I'll disrupt an offender any way I possibly can, so that we can give time and space for that victim to see where that then leads us. But obviously we need to build trust and confidence. And I'm hoping that in the slides that you've just seen, and the slide that you're about to see, that I've proven to you today that we have gone a long, long way in relation to this, and we are building on that position we was at into a really strong and healthy position in building trust and confidence in communities and victims and with our partners. And the last slide looks to reiterate that. So there's some good levels here, there's some really good levels here of examples of how we are actually using prepare techniques that fits our 4P plan, prevention techniques, protection techniques and pursue techniques. So without going into too much detail around these are all historic in some respects now in terms of investigations or operations, but you can see there that on the first example at Rotherham, that was around a hotspot. So that's around intelligence that we used, that was a hotspot. It started to concern us, and as a result we used non-real police powers to disrupt that location, to shut it down before any offending took place, and able to then in partnership put an end to that location as a hotspot. That's really key, and that is an everyday part of our policing response to CSE. The next one as we move along is the LifeWise Centre. Unbelievable numbers that pass through the LifeWise Centre, really trying to help us with that. Well, prepare, because we learn a lot from engaging with the children, but also around giving them the right messages so that they can protect themselves and parents, because there's sessions for parents in there too, to try and ensure that we can get to people before they report offences to us, because that is what we're seeking to avoid at the utmost. And then working in partnership, we've got, I think it's probably a brand that's quite well known, Operation Make Safe. What we have here is again working in partnership against those hotspot locations or areas that concern us through our intelligence profiles, to be able to disrupt that location, and what we then enforce against that is then learning, so training into that location. And then the more classic pursue elements, but this wasn't always commonplace within policing, but it is now. And this is where, even if we don't get disclosures from victims, but the evidence is there, then we will look to disrupt that offender by prosecuting them. And this is a really, really good case around that, where that prosecution took place and the victim was given confidence by our approach into that, and was then able to come and give evidence, support that prosecution, for that suspect then to get quite a healthy sentence within the cause. So, Deputy Mayor, I hope you've been convinced by what I've said in terms of our approach to CSE, and just to reiterate the fact that we will forever be trying to improve our performance in relation to this. It will never stop.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you to Lauren, Chief Constable, and colleagues for sharing that. And part of this isn't about my assurance, is it? It's about the public's assurance. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of people with a lot of questions now as we draw to the end of this meeting. So I do want to put it out there, if people are listening to this on the web, or there may be people in this room, to submit questions that we will pick up at the next meeting. So, you know, I've got a lot of questions that I would like to ask about the data. I mean, one of them would be some of the data showing in terms of the reported offending, how much of that is historic, so people are coming forward now to say, I was also abused, I would like to now come forward and report that crime. So it'd be really interesting to be able to have a bit more understanding about that. Clearly the demographics of the victims and the perpetrators, be it age or ethnicity, is really important for us to understand, because again, I think what's really helpful is to see this in its totality in terms of sexual offending, and I think it's important for the public to understand that in its widest context, and what police and partners are trying to do to combat that, and that increased threat through cyber-enabled crime as well. That is something we need to really focus on. So it's quite a lot out there. Time has run out, but I would like to be able to bring back some of those questions that I do think will come in now. I do hope will come in, and unless there's anything else people particularly want to raise now as a matter of urgency, is there anything that people do want to? I think, you know, we're very happy to keep a few minutes for that. I am hoping that today has encouraged people who are watching, public who have attended, to go out and speak to people in the community, any groups you represent, that we are serious about this scrutiny board. I think we've seen some candid, frank responses. We want more of that. I think that's important. We focused today on protecting vulnerable people. There's a lot more we could have focused on. I appreciate that. Want to encourage members of the public to send in questions, attend a meeting. Next time we will have that removed, and there'll be a whole room around there where more members of the public can come and sit. This is about developing trust and confidence. This is about the South Yorkshire community, understanding what we're trying to do, understanding the new regime in terms of the South Yorkshire Police and the leadership team. So please do raise issues. I know listening to some of this can be triggering and can be really difficult, but I do hope the essence of what we're trying to do is out there. So Matt was sending me notes. The Safer Streets Summer Initiative, which has been a fantastic initiative, and lots of work being done in our districts across South Yorkshire. We're going to bring back next time, so it'll be a retrospective look at what we did this summer in terms of ensuring our streets are safe for people to be out there. There's a work programme that I do believe is on the website anyway in terms of what we're going to discuss in the future. I did mention some of them around safer streets, rural crime. I have got a list here, but I'm just mindful. Thank you. We'll always talk about performance because I think it's important. The fraud, cybercrime and economic crime, and we'll pick up the safer streets. The next public-facing meeting is on the 3rd of December. So again, you know, we might be too successful. We might have to find somewhere else where we can bring all the people together. But apart from that, I think I just need to bring the meeting to close. And I can't thank you enough for coming, attending. Hopefully it's going to spark ideas going forward, but really appreciate it. Thank you for people in that room doing the webs and the cameras and the spotlighting. It's difficult. So I'll bring the meeting to a close, and again, thank you on my behalf, but also Oliver Coppard, the Mayor's behalf as well. So thank you very much.